Azerbaijan billion.
Ülkemiz birinci Avropa oyunlarının keçirilməsindən tam
Critics say that Azerbaijan's drive for sport is simply a tool for international propaganda.
Azerbaycan makes them controversial too. Bu hadisənin nüfuzdan salma cəhdlərinin daha aydın şahidi olur.
Hello, I'm Barbara Sarah, standing in for Richard Gisbert, and you're at the Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're looking at this week. As the sporting events wrap up in Baku, Azerbaijan says it's been 2 weeks of fun and games, but journalists have a different story to tell. The latest release by Wikileaks reveals the secrets of Saudi Arabia's management of media at home and in the region. And they're calling it reverse colonialism in Portugal, where Angolan money is making its way into numerous industries, including the media. The 2015 European Games may lack the cachet of the Olympics or football's World Cup. But for Azerbaijan, where the Games are coming to a close this weekend, they are the main event in the sporting calendar and the political calendar as well. The government in Baku has invested heavily in the Games. The official cost is $1.2 billion. For President Ilham Aliyev, himself a sports fanatic and the former head of the Azerbaijani Olympic Committee, well, it's oil money well spent. But with the athletes come the journalists, and the Aliyev government's track record on dealing with the media is poor. Some foreign reporters the government has taken issue with were simply barred from the Games, locked out. But Azerbaijani journalists have more to lose than just their press cards. Reporting on corruption and human rights has landed some of them in jail. The case of Khadija Ismailova, which has gained international attention, is just the best known. Our starting point this week is the Olympic Stadium in Baku. The Listening Post's Will Young reports.
The day before the first European Games opened, Azerbaijani journalists gathered to hear an address from the head of the Azerbaijan Press Council. The first ever European Games, he said, are an extremely important event. Sharing such moments is not just an expression of our joy, but an essential patriotic mission. Foreign media were clearly not with the programme. According to the council, they had launched a total information war against the country. So when 5 international journalists, including one from The Guardian and another from Radio France Internationale, complained that they'd been refused accreditation, Azerbaijan's authorities were not too remorseful.
The refusal on the part of the government to admit certain journalists, they don't want to see any critical reporting about Azerbaijan. They say, okay, you can come to Azerbaijan, but report about how beautiful we are, how wonderful we are, how great is our food, how advanced we are, but don't talk about those people who are in jail, don't talk about corruption. And the government's attempt to create this criticism-free zone failed.
During the European Games, several newspapers like The Guardian, Independent, Der Spiegel, Le Monde started publishing identical articles about human rights and freedom of speech issues in Azerbaijan. Why did The Guardian suddenly publish more than 30 articles about Azerbaijan in 1 month, and only 2 had anything to do with the European Games? German newspapers published more than 30 negative articles in less than 10 days.
The international media coverage has remained consistent, at least in the Western media, criticism of the Azeri authorities, criticism of their human rights record and of the high-level corruption.
The international community has called on Azerbaijan to release political prisoners.
Much of that work was initiated by one of Azerbaijan's top investigative reporters. And even though she's behind bars now, even though Khadija Ismailova is in pre-trial detention and has been for the past 9 months or so, her work has been carried forward.
Nor has Ismailova herself remained silent. Letters smuggled out of jail, the latest published in the New York Times, have drawn global attention to her imprisonment, and that of 7 other journalists. Midway through the Games, a group of 25 countries at the UN criticised Azerbaijan's press freedom record. One outlet that has been under pressure is Azadliq, a newspaper based in the capital.
Azadliq has had to pay huge fines. Our editor-in-chief has been arrested. Our satirical writer was also arrested. One of our workers was raped and beaten. 2 of our colleagues had to leave the country after being stabbed.
Domestically in Azerbaijan, government crashed all the independent media. There is almost virtually no independent media left. All the critical voices are in jail. When it comes to this event, of course, the main pictures you see how the winners from Azerbaijani side being awarded by the president. He's there and he's presenting the award. He's using this opportunity to show that, see, your success is connected to me.
Using the media to build a cult of personality is a tactic Ilham Aliyev would have learned from his father, Heydar Aliyev, the country's first post-Soviet leader. The family has held the presidency since Azerbaijan gained independence in 1991. And in these 24 years, their hold over key industries, banking, gold mining, telecommunications, has intensified. Most of the mass media in Azerbaijan is controlled by the state, or by figures close to it. One of the country's main TV channels, Space TV, is owned by the president's sister. Another, Leader TV, by his cousin.
Most of the media in Azerbaijan is state-controlled, and the message has been very singular and straight to the point ever since they won the right to host these games. And that has been to bolster Azeri identity. The lack of transparency and how much it really did cost the Azeri people isn't something that the Azeri people have actually been able to discuss.
The media in Azerbaijan have abandoned the basic principles of the profession. Journalists do not even adhere to the basic mission of the press, which is to tell the truth. All they're doing is hyping events in the country. After establishing a corrupt monopoly in government, they decided to create a monopoly in the media as well.
Azerbaijan rejected media censorship back in 1996, and today the media is developing despite some economic problems. Azerbaijan's media are becoming more professional with each and every international event. And I'm sure that the attitudes of the world towards our country will change in a positive way.
The government's paranoia about Azerbaijan's public image is a hangover of the independence struggle. As a young Muslim-majority country in the Caucasus, fighting a war with the Armenians in the southwest and bordered by powerful states, including Russia and Iran, Azerbaijan was in a hurry to establish itself in the community of Western nations. A thorn in its side has been the US-funded Radio Free Europe's Azerbaijani service, Radio Azadliq. Last year, their bureau in Baku was raided and shut down.
Now, government's argument, they're saying, look, we are independent, we don't need radio liberty anymore. Because you're talking about our problems. We don't want you to talk about where the oil mine is going. We don't want you to talk about the human rights abuses.
The right to disseminate news and information belongs to Azerbaijan, just like the territory of Azerbaijan belongs to Azerbaijan. Azadliq radio cannot be considered as a local media outlet because there are no agreements between Azerbaijan and the US over Azadliq radio. That is why the radio station has been suspended.
Local journalists in prison, troublesome foreign media locked out, and a clear diktat to those covering Azerbaijan. Watch what you say or pay the price. The European Games is just one of a number of sporting events that Azerbaijan is using to showcase itself to the world. But for the government, the lesson could be this. When you invite the world to tune in and watch, it's not always possible to control the way that you are seen.
On the download this week, our viewers on the games in Azerbaijan and the challenges of reporting from there.
The reaction of Azerbaijani government to the coverage of the European Games has been quite interesting. They've come up with a very interesting concept saying that all of the negative coverage is part of this anti-Azerbaijan campaign directed from the US and more recently Germany. So they've blamed every single outlet and journalists for double standards.
Journalists must be objective. This is the main future of our profession and professionalism. Some Western media organizations just put the positive and sports meaning of the games away and politicize it. I think they don't investigate some issues and just blame the country. We all know that there must be at least 3 positions in an article and right of reply, but unfortunately we don't see them in their articles.
Other media stories on our radar this week. Saudi Arabia has instructed its citizens and domestic media to ignore a new trove of secret diplomatic cables published by Wikileaks. On June 19th, the website published more than 60,000 documents, which it says come from the Saudi Foreign Ministry and its embassies around the world. They provide rare insight into the kingdom's diplomacy and contain numerous revelations about Riyadh's management of regional media, from a $2 million lifeline to the Lebanese MTV network in exchange for favorable coverage, to lobbying the Egyptian on-TV network to keep Saudi dissidents off the air. One of the cables reveals concerns over Al-Alam, the Iranian state-owned news channel that broadcasts in Arabic. The Saudi government tried to have Al-Alam dropped from its satellite TV provider Arabsat and instructed it to use, quote, technical means to lessen the Iranian broadcast strength. Wikileaks, whose co-founder Julian Assange is still in the Ecuadorian embassy in London seeking political asylum, says it has another 500,000 Saudi documents which will be released in the months to come. An Al Jazeera journalist who was detained in Germany on an Egyptian arrest warrant has been released without charge. Ahmed Mansour, a presenter on Al Jazeera's Arabic channel, was detained at Berlin's Tegel airport as he was preparing to board a flight to Doha. He was held for 48 hours while German authorities considered Egyptian requests for his extradition. This is the latest in a series of clashes between the Egyptian state and the Qatari Al Jazeera network. Last year, Mansour was tried in absentia by an Egyptian court and sentenced to 15 years in prison on charges of torturing a lawyer in Tahrir Square back in 2011. Mansour denies the charges. Observers say this is unlikely to be the end of the Egyptian pursuit of Mansour. The government, led by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, has taken issue with Mansour's reporting in 2013, which was seen as being in favor of deposed President Mohamed Morsi. Reacting to Mansour's release, Al Jazeera's acting director general, Mustafa Sweg, said, "We hope that this will be a lesson to the Egyptian authorities that the rest of the world values freedom of the press. Rather than trying to expand their war on journalists, they should free the journalists that they have on trial and in jail in Cairo, including Bahir Mohammed and Mohammed Fahmy, and end the action against those tried in absentia." America's largest newspaper publisher, Gannett, has produced a bizarre team-building video designed for internal consumption, and it's gone public at an inopportune time. Everything is awesome. In the video, senior managers, including CEO Gracia Martore, don sunglasses and guitars and belt out a lip-synced parody video of the song "Everything is Awesome" from the Lego Movie. Among those not singing along were Gannett employees, both in the US and the UK. Staff at the company's British wing, NewsQuest, have just gone on strike over the company's plans to restructure its UK operations and Gannett's refusal to agree to their demand for a pay rise of 3%. In the US, the publisher has had 3 straight years of restructuring. Staff have been given early retirement packages or have just been laid off. For the record, Chief Executive Operating Officer Martore makes about $11 million a year. Stealing a line from an online commenter who knew that lip syncing could be so tone deaf.
Take it away, guys.
There's a term being used to describe the current relationship between Portugal and the country that it ruled for 400 years, Angola. That term is reverse colonization, and it can be seen across Portugal from banks to the media. Angola has a poor track record on media freedom. Its leader, José Eduardo dos Santos, has been in power for more than 3 decades, and the media's ability to report has been so severely curtailed that many Angolans depend on news outlets from the former colonial power to get uncensored coverage of their own country. But Angolan oil and diamond money has been pouring into Portugal over the past few years, with investments in all kinds of industries, including the media. And that, according to journalists in both countries, affects the kind of reporting done in Portugal on the story in Angola. The Listening Post's Gouri Sharma now on Angola and the news media at home and abroad.
Last month, a long-running court case against Angolan journalist Rafael Marques came to an end. 7 Angolan generals had sued Marques for defamation after he accused them of torture and human rights abuses in his book, Blood Diamonds, Corruption and Torture in Angola. Marques was found guilty and given a 6-month suspended sentence. He called it a blow to freedom of expression in the country, saying, "It's sending a message that we can lock you up anytime we want."
I have faced threats, I have faced imprisonment, I was beaten up. The reason why I continue, it's because I believe that as a journalist, as an investigative journalist, it is my duty to do the right thing.
Rafael Marques is known for investigating and disclosing inconvenient issues for the government. Is mainly concerned with human rights and corruption. This work is recognized internationally, so it's not surprising that he has been targeted by the Angolan elite.
Marques is a touchy subject in Portuguese media as well. Up until 2014, Mário Crespo was a news anchor on the privately owned channel SIC Noticias. Earlier this month, he wrote an op-ed in daily newspaper Público, explaining how when he interviewed Marques, he was warned of the problems it would cause. He said this pressure was exerted to, quote, avoid offending Angolan money. Coverage on Angola and its elite has caused problems in Portugal before.
E faz todo sentido nesse aspecto continuar, eu diria, aprofundar as parcerias.
3 years ago, the country's leading broadcaster, RTP, aired a 2-hour talk show featuring businessmen and politicians from both countries discussing their growing relationship.
Os palhaços ricos e figuras grotescas do folclore local.
Journalist Pedro Rosa Mensch later called it a disgusting piece of political propaganda on a radio show called Este Tempo. Este Tempo was cancelled a week later, but RTP insisted it had been planning to pull the plug for a while.
There are the cases of open censorship, of even a certain amount of retaliation against free-spirited journalists. But the most frequent outcome is by far self-censorship and careful accommodation with the status quo.
Angola is almost a taboo subject in Portugal, especially when something is bad for the Angolan government. Given the constraints, the most sensitive issues are not covered or are not covered deeply enough.
Portuguese media are increasingly monitoring and scrutinizing what's happening in Angola. That's because Angolans are the biggest foreign investors in Portugal. Portuguese media covered the country's civil war, and even though there were a few quiet years after that, the recent increase in Angolan investment has put the country back in the spotlight.
According to some estimates, Angolans have invested between 10 to 15 billion euros in industries ranging from banking, construction, telecommunications and energy. When it comes to the media, some key figures stand out. The eldest daughter of the Angolan president, Isabel dos Santos, and mining and oil magnate António Mosquito. While there are no records of dos Santos' shares in the Portuguese media, analysts say that Mosquito acts as her proxy, and he is listed as owning stakes in Global Media Group that owns 4 newspaper titles, including prominent daily journal de Noticias and TSF Radio. Then there's Álvaro Sobrinho, who made his name in banking. Sobrinho is the main shareholder in media conglomerate Newshold, which owns the Weekly Soul and Daily Eye.
It started as a strategy from a Portuguese banker to help a Portuguese politician with Angolan money. And then Angolans learned that it worked pretty well, so they said, okay, we want this venue for our propaganda as well. And that's how Angolans then became quite prominent in acquiring shares in the Portuguese media.
The question that matters is, why do they invest in Portuguese media? The thing is, what's published in Angolan newspapers doesn't have the credibility of what's published in Portugal. So their strategy is to influence the Angolan public opinion through what's printed in Portugal. If one controls the media in Portugal, it will control the public opinion in Angola.
Angola, a country of 20 million, gained independence from Portugal in 1975. A civil war was fought until 2002, and one man has ruled the country for 36 years, José Eduardo dos Santos. Despite being one of Africa's largest producers of oil and rich in diamonds, the wealth hasn't trickled down, with nearly 40% of the population living below the poverty line. The country's record on press freedom is poor. It ranks 123 out of 180 in the Reporters Without Borders' latest Press Freedom Index. The media environment is tightly controlled by the government in Luanda. The private media outlets are owned by those with ties to the government, and dissident voices are curtailed.
For a long time, there was a sort of division of labor, whereby the government accepted some pluralism, especially in the print media, because it just didn't circulate much outside Luanda, whereas the radio and television were and remain tightly controlled. Over the last 5 years, even those print media outlets have been curtailed because the government started to realize that they still circulate to an influential segment of public opinion.
What remains of non-controlled government media is very negligent in terms of serving the people. We have one independent newspaper, Folha 8. It doesn't print nowadays more than 5,000 copies a week, and so it does not have an outreach. And each newspaper costs around 500 kwanzas, which is equivalent to $5, which is extremely expensive for the majority of the people. The economic pressure and the fact that the government was able to buy through proxy companies what existed of independent media has resolved the problem of censorship.
The Santos government has had a firm grip on the Angolan media for nearly 40 years. Now, as Angolan money and influence spreads over Portuguese media, the question is, how deep will the impact be on the journalism there?
We can now clearly see a pattern of political intrusion, of influence, designed both to curtail the space for legitimate discussion of Angolan-related issues, but most importantly, present very proactively a certain Angolan-friendly way of being in the world. This is a very serious concern, and in the medium term, it's obviously a threat to Portuguese media freedom more generally.
The majority of investigative and critical news reporting being done about Angola can be found online. One of the most influential news sites is Club K. Launched 15 years ago, Club K is run by volunteers based outside the country. The site publishes stories in Portuguese and works with citizen journalists across Angola. The focus is on corruption, human rights, education, and social justice. Articles are published anonymously, and no one knows exactly where the servers are. Then there's the Portuguese language Rede Angola. Based out of Lisbon and Luanda, the site describes itself as an independent journalism portal that disseminates Angolan news and thought. Launched 2 years ago, the site is privately financed, and contributors include a number of prominent Angolan journalists, musicians, and artists. It's gained popularity over the past 2 years for its critical op-eds and news reporting. Finally, we are ending this week's show with a clip from government-funded TV in Azerbaijan. State media coverage of Baku 2015 has been heavy on pomp and splendor. The official news agency Azadliq has been the main provider of photographs and footage from the Games, and one clip from their video stream caught our eye. It's a music video montage of sorts depicting Baku 2015's mascots, Ceyran and Nar, a gazelle and a pomegranate, covered cavorting around the capital, guiding tourists, and even posing for selfies. There has been lots of feel-good media produced by Azerbaijan's state outlets and their PR advisors in Washington, the Podesta Group. This particular clip has captured audiences not only at home, but also online. Enjoy it, and we'll see you next time right here at The Listening Post.